All right, good evening and welcome everybody. I'm Rabbi Leah Berkowitz and this event is hosted by Congregation Kolami. We're delighted to have Dr. Aaron Berkowitz with us who will introduce in a moment. We want to be very conscious of what is going on in the world right now. Aaron's going to be talking a lot about what's going on in other parts of the world, but our own world feels very tumultuous right now. And in fact, there are people around the country taking a knee right now, and for those who have been killed by police violence. And I thought, actually, Aaron asked me if we could do this. We're going to take a moment of silence to, in solidarity with people who have been protesting and in solidarity with people whose lives have been lost or who have lost family members. Thank you. So this is a very big treat for all of us, and it's especially a treat for me. This is actually, we don't get together as a family that often. This was really just an excuse to get Aaron's undivided attention for an hour. I wanted to, first of all, wish Aaron a happy book birthday. His book, One by One by One, came out yesterday. I want to strongly encourage you to purchase this from your local bookstore. Our local bookstore is Open Book Bookstore. You could also support Blue Marble Bookstore in Mount Airy, which is LGBTQ owned. So in honor of Pride Month, if you want to support a queer-owned business, that's an option. As many of you know, I'm going to, as I introduce my brother, as many of you know that a lot of times people will come up to me and say, oh, your parents must be, your family must be so proud of you. And I'll go, oh yeah, but my brother's a doctor. I am also incredibly proud of him. I'm only a little bit jealous just because I'm a middle child and it wouldn't be normal if I wasn't. I have watched for most of your life, watch Aaron on his evolution to becoming a physician and becoming an expert and an expert and a teacher in global medicine. And I've gotten to see all sides of it. And as we'll talk about in a moment, he's taken a very unique path to get there. So I'm really excited it was exciting for me to read this book because I learned things about him that I didn't know. And you will have that same opportunity if you read this book. And Aaron's going to share some of it with us this evening, and we'll give you a little taste of it so that you can understand what it's about and why it would be a great read during these times. So first of all, I want to introduce Aaron by saying that Aaron Berkowitz, MD, PhD. Actually, it came up on Facebook today. It's been 10 years since Aaron officially became a doctor. Is the founding director of global health at Kaiser Permanente School of Medicine, and previously served on the faculty of Harvard Medical School and led the Global Neurology Program at Brigham and Women's Hospital. A health and policy advisor to Partners in Health, which we'll learn more about in a little bit, and senior specialist consultant to Doctors Without Borders. Aaron has worked in Haiti, Malawi, Vietnam, and the Navajo Nation. And his work has been featured in the New York Times, the Boston Globe, the Washington Post, and Boston Magazine. And now it is featured in this book. So we want to welcome Dr. Aaron Berkowitz. And if you could unmute yourself and say hi.
Hi, well, thank you for that warm introduction, Leah. I don't think you've ever referred to me with my formal titles.
I know, it feels really weird.
And, to your point, I remember at my graduation from residency, one of my mentors came and asked what you did, and you said, well, I'm the rabbi, but he's the doctor. And they said, oh no, we understand. The rabbi is the much more prestigious position. And I really appreciated hearing that from my boss in residency.
Yeah.
So thank you for doing this. And it's been great to discuss the book with you as I was writing it and then hearing the final product. And looking forward to what questions you have for me, and will certainly keep me on my toes.
Yes, yes. did you want to read a little bit first, or
Up to you, whenever you
questions
think.
first? Okay.
It's your show.
Okay. All right. Well, I wanted to make one more note that I've said in a couple of our items. Aaron is not charging us for his time, because that would be silly. And our synagogue has, and all sorts of Jewish institutions have been working really hard to provide online content. So please support your local synagogue, please, and Jewish institutions. Please support your local bookstore, and please consider also supporting Partners in Health, which I think you'll want to do by the end of this talk anyway. So as I said, and I got to see the story again in the book, Aaron took a not a direct path to medicine, though I remember when we were kids, and you always did want to be a doctor. It was just you took a lot of different paths to get there, and you ended up being really involved in global medicine and doing a lot of work in Haiti. So I wanted to hear from you, why global medicine, and why particularly Haiti?
Right, so the path was winding, as you know, from the linear, I want to be a doctor when I grow up, to realizing that was going to be a lot of hard work and a lot of time to do, and kind of winding in and out. And as you know, during medical school, I left for 6 years to pursue music. I thought medical school was too hard and too long, and at times too boring, and to do some other things. And it was interestingly, while I was in graduate school for music and mentoring undergraduate pre-meds, that they all started saying, we want to go to medical school because we want to do global health. And when I was in medical school, our epidemiology course was not on the radar. I think the answer to every question in public health to the cause of the outbreak was the egg salad on the cruise ship, which does not really reflect the realities of a lot of public health crises that I was seeing as a medical student living in Baltimore. And yet this new generation of medical students, many of them have been inspired by this book, Mountains Beyond Mountains, by Tracy Kidder, which profiles Paul Farmer in this organization, Partners in Health. And sort of to the end of my music degree, wondering, what am I going to do with all this, that all these very inspiring students had worked with Partners in Health or read that book and told me about it. And by the time I read it, I just felt incredibly, sort of my eyes had been opened. As a pre-internet generation person growing up, you didn't really know what was going on in the world at any given moment. And suddenly, when you knew, you realized there were major problems of inequity, of poverty, and that doctors like Paul Farmer, even individuals, could make some type of difference. So that's what really sort of started putting me back in reverse, back to medical school, or back into forward, depending on how you look at it. And so that's how I got interested in global health. And Haiti, this is really just serendipity. I think you and I will probably have a number of stories that'll come back to our shared childhood, but you may remember growing up, we had the choice to learn French or Spanish. And had I been able to talk to my younger self, I would have said, as a doctor, Spanish is the much more practical language to know as a doctor in the United States. But as you may remember, the Spanish teacher would charge a penny if you spoke a word of English, and you would be losing lots of pennies. And for that silly reason, I decided to take French instead. And so decades later, when I was interested in global health and talked to colleagues at Partners in Health, they said, what languages do you have? And I said, French. They said, what's your specialty? I said, neurology. And they said, well, Haiti is a former French colony, and so French speaking, and they have one neurologist for 11 million people. So you've got your life's work cut out for you. So that's how, through some mix of twists, turns, and serendipity, I ended up in Haiti.
And a lot of what your book is about is what you found there, and you explore that through 3 particular cases. And I actually remember you telling us about Janelle over Thanksgiving dinner one year, and we were like cross-talking and having a million different conversations. So it kind of didn't register, and then it became this really interesting case, and became this really important part of your life and your medical career. So tell us a little bit about Janelle, and tell us a little bit about the other 2 cases that you talk about in the book.
Yeah, so Janelle's story is the main story, and the book begins with an email I got about maybe 2 years after I had started working in Haiti, and early on when I had just graduated residency, just starting life as a neurologist. And the main thing I had been asked to do in Haiti was to teach neurology, because if you think about it, if you have one neurologist for a whole country, it means most patients aren't going to be able to see that person. And it also means the person's probably pretty busy and is not teaching classes in the medical school. So you have many doctors who have gone to medical school without contact with a neurologist. So one of the doctors I was working with, learning neurology, wrote to me, and the book begins with his email saying, I have a very complicated patient here named Janelle. And Janelle actually had a very large brain tumor, the largest myself or any of my colleagues had ever seen. And he had a tumor that could not be cared for in Haiti. It would require very complicated surgery. And the book sort of begins with the question of how do you try to help someone from a very different place and get them to the modern medical care that we should all have access to, or bring it to them. So the story really revolves around what I describe as the triumphs, tragedies, and confusing spaces in between, as we tried to build a bridge between the most high-tech medical centers of Harvard and Boston and some of the rural, most poor, destitute areas of Haiti, where most people are living on $1 or less a day. That's a little bit about Janelle. While we were working through his case and trying to get him the care he needed, we met a little boy named Davidson, or Davidson in local pronunciation, who developed paralysis of his arms and legs, and also had a large tumor in his spine, who would need care as well. And then finally, a pastor in Haiti in his 40s or so, who developed a tumor that was causing him to go blind. So 3 cases all in need of complicated and delicate neurosurgery in a country where that wasn't possible. And so the book revolves around how, if and how, and in what ways we can try to help people from very different backgrounds under very different circumstances, and what we might learn in that process.
So a lot of your work is inspired by the work of Dr. Paul Farmer, who helped found Partners in Health. And he has, for one thing, it sounds like the two of you at times had a bit of a debate about whether it's better to bring patients to the US or whether it's better to bring the modern medicine to Haiti. So I'd love to hear more about that conversation. And then also he used this phrase that you've now picked up of a stupid death. And I'd kind of like to hear about how Dr. Farmer defines stupid death and what you're doing to prevent them. You look a little frozen. Are you still there? Oh, man. Aaron? Aaron, are you still there?
I'm working on it. Am I back?
I can hear you. You're just not moving now. So if you want to just talk and we can...
Can you hear me? You froze for me. It might have been on my end. So I saw you were asking me a question, but I didn't hear it.
Oh, okay. So we were talking a little bit about how you were inspired by Dr. Farmer, and that you had a little bit of an argument as to whether it's better to bring modern medicine to Haiti or whether it's better to bring people from Haiti to the US. And also he has this phrase, stupid death. And I wanted you to explain that phrase a little bit to us and talk about what you do to prevent those.
Yeah, so Paul Farmer, as you said, is a physician and runs Partners in Health, and also a medical anthropologist. If you can see this bookshelf behind me, this shelf is almost all his, well, I guess you can't see me moving, but is...
You can see the shelf though.
Yeah, is almost all of his books about concepts like one he calls structural violence, which is how the forces of history, politics, and economics affect individuals and their health. And this idea of stupid deaths refers to the idea of people who die in their countries of conditions or for reasons for which they would never have died in a rich country. So this is a concept we can apply even in our own country right now, where there are some people who are in some ways very safe from coronavirus, and as we've learned, the very disabled in nursing homes, or those who can't social distance due to living conditions, or those with pre-existing diseases that have not been well cared for, or those who are socioeconomically disadvantaged or otherwise marginalized that can't get the medical care that they would need to survive coronavirus. So these he refers to as stupid deaths, where patients, say in Haiti, like Janelle, would have been diagnosed much earlier with his brain tumor before it became so complicated. Fortunately, Janelle does not suffer a stupid death, but many others in his situation who didn't find their way to the doctor who found his way to me so that we could get him to Boston would suffer that. So that's the concept of a stupid death, and a lot of farmers' work he calls, one of the main tensions that I talk about in the book is, do you try to do the things that will prevent more people from ending up in front of you, risking suffering a stupid death, or do you take each case in front of you like Janelle and try to do something in that moment? And there's this tension of the time, resources, effort it would take to help one individual versus saying having the funds to vaccinate an entire community or to help one patient with a brain tumor. How would you even think about making that kind of decision? So he calls that one of the chief tensions of our work, helping the patient in front of you versus preventing the next patient from ending up in front of you.
Yes. I wish our confirmation students were on this because they always loved a good ethical dilemma. So there are a lot of ethical challenges that come up with this, and one of the reasons that, because we had talked about with everything that was going on whether this was still an appropriate topic for tonight, and I think we both decided it very much is, because inequities in the healthcare system, they get divided across racial lines, across national lines, across economic lines, and I think that's very relevant to a lot of what's going on in every country right now. This case, the Janelle case, happened when you were very newly a doctor, and as a young doctor, and particularly as a young global health specialist, you were really enamored of this idea of the big save, of I'm going to take this person to Boston and fix him and dramatically improve his life. And I wanted to ask how your understanding of a big save changed while you were working with Janelle.
Are we allowing spoiler alerts?
I think so. Yeah. I don't think knowing what happens to the patients or not happening to the patients will impact how much people will enjoy or be interested by this book.
Oh, I'm glad to hear you say that. Well, it's an interesting thing. In neurology, we're not a big save kind of medical specialty. If you think of many of the diseases we care for, although we can have great success treating the headaches of migraine, the flares of multiple sclerosis, the difficult movements of Parkinson's disease, there are diseases like Alzheimer's or Lou Gehrig's disease that, we're pretty powerless to treat. So this is not for the most part, a high adrenaline type of thing where, that the new heart comes in from the helicopter and we're jumping in to implant it, and someone, survives at the last moment. This is not that kind of, there's not a show about neurologists the way there is about ER or surgery, right? And so it's not a specialty where we think about big saves or big life-saving moments. And, Partners in Health, their mission statement is a very inspiring one. And the first paragraph says they're trying to serve two purposes. One is to bring the benefits of modern healthcare to those who need them most, and the other is to serve as an antidote to despair. That was a title I briefly toyed with for the book, Antidote to Despair, but people thought it was a little bit dark. But meeting Janelle,
I'm really a big fella right now.
Fair enough. Meeting Janelle was a moment for me as a young doctor and as a neurologist to say, oh, I've never had this experience that a surgeon must have when they say, I'm going to, cut this person open and, remove their cancer and throw it in the trash and, celebrate saving their life or, implanting a heart. For me to say I've never been in that so-called, playing God position that some people think doctors are in, where I'm in a position to really try to do something for this patient that if I don't step up, nobody else is. And, it's a good question. What is a big save? And that, as you astutely pointed out, that's sort of what the book revolves around. That may mean something very different for the doctor and for their patient. What is a success? What is a save? What is the quality of life that the patient is looking for? And so without giving too much away, I'll say that's something I learned a lot about through taking care of these patients, what it is they wanted, what it was I could provide, and trying to find across cultural lines and all sorts of other, complicated differences coming from the wealthy, and medically wealthy city of Boston to, one of the poorest parts of the world and in the poorest country in our hemisphere. So trying to understand across those differences what somebody wants um, and what we can provide are some of the tensions that we explore, in our relationship in the book.
And some of those tensions made me think of, I know probably a lot of people on this call have read, and you and I have read, Atul Gawande's Being Mortal. And I was really fascinated as a non-medical person by the idea of the best outcome might not be about, it might be different for every person, but it might not be about any specific physical or mental function. It's about how you define a good day or a good life. And I wanted to know, what does a good outcome look like for someone who's in Haiti? Is there a good outcome, especially because, a lot of times you would help someone and then they'd go back to like crippling poverty. How does that change your perception of what a good outcome is?
Yeah, I mean, that's a question that I appreciated. One review of this book said something like, the questions are harrowing, although no answers are provided. And I think I said, oh, they understood. Yeah, I can't solve these problems. And this is, again, comes back to that tension of the one or the many, right? I'm not Paul Farmer. I haven't, written a whole shelf of treatises on medicine and public health. And I'm not sure I can or could quote Save the World. The subtitle of his biography is The Man Who Would Save the World. And yet, when we see one person in front of us, can we do something for them? And yet, as you said, medical care is only part of the care of a patient. And Janelle came to us very disabled neurologically in terms of unable to walk, unable to talk. And if the surgery makes him a little better, he's not going to have a wheelchair in Haiti. And if he did have one on a dirt, rocky road, it's not going to be very difficult to navigate. He was a young student. There's not going to be an accessible classroom for him. And so, again, what does it mean to make his life better? And, one of the very moving moments for me, and a moment I describe in the book, is when I go to Haiti after he's returned there after his surgery and see that he's not doing as well as we'd hoped. And I meet his mother, and I'm sort of embarrassed and not speaking Creole that well at that point, trying to figure out how am I going to apologize that she might have had a lot of hope that these doctors had come from America and were going to rescue her son, and he really didn't get that much better after the surgery. And when you ask people in Haiti, how are you, there's a number of expressions, and one of them is just, I'm here, moi là. And that doesn't sound very positive, but some of the other ones are map boule, I'm burning, map lutte, I'm struggling, map cambe, I'm hanging on. So I'm here is actually not too bad. And I asked her, how's Janelle, sort of cringing, and she smiled and she said, he's here, Lila, he's here. And I think the fact that he was going to die a stupid death and he didn't, was in some ways what more than she could have hoped for, even though it was less than we could have hoped for. So I think that was part of, as you said, this idea of being mortal. What is it to you? And as doctors, we have to, always guard against the tendency of saying we want to fix something. It might not need to be fixed, or the patient might not want it to be fixed in the way we would want it fixed for ourselves. So imagine now that complexity. It's hard enough when you're talking to someone from your culture, your race, your hometown. Now imagine doing it, even if not that many miles away, worlds away. So these are some of the complexities we explore, in the book.
Yeah, and it sounds like there were not only language barriers, because it's not just French, it's Haitian Creole that you were learning, though there was a lot of overlap with French. It sounds like it's like a French Yiddish. I actually thought a lot of the Creole phrases reminded me of Yiddish phrases, because if you ask somebody in an Orthodox community, how are you? They'll say Baruch Hashem, which is like praise God, which is basically, the version of I'm here, or I can't complain, or, thank God I'm alive. And that resonated a lot. What were some of the cultural, and maybe also linguistic, but more the cultural barriers that you faced talking with Janelle and with other patients?
Yeah, so the biggest challenge with Janelle was that he couldn't really talk. He was so impaired from this brain tumor that he couldn't talk. So others in his family and in his church community were speaking for him. He was a 23-year-old man, but had been very ill for a long time. So again, one of the complexities is, as you said, talking about being mortal and the end of life. If you can't talk, who is going to talk for you, and what do they want? And it was interesting early on, speaking from the kind of American doctor perspective, I wanted to make sure that Janelle and his family really understood the risk, because there's lots of groups from America that go down to Haiti and might perform cataract surgeries or other more straightforward surgeries that are miraculous. Patients who were blind can suddenly see. You replace a hip, a patient who couldn't walk can walk. This wasn't going to look like that. This was, at the best case, he gets a little better. At the most likely case, he stays the same but survives longer. And in the worst case, he could get worse. A very delicate, day-long, neurosurgery is no small thing. And I really wanted to make sure he and his family understood the risks. They were very religious, and they kept saying, it's in God's hands. It's going to be a miracle. It's in God's hands. And, I'm a scientist. I'm a doctor. I wanted to be a realist and say, okay, but after that, it's in the surgeon's hands, and he's just a human being. And this is a complicated situation, and we can't promise it's going to go well. And interesting advice I got there culturally early on from a priest and psychologist who works with the Partners in Health team there. He said, in the United States, patients want to be part of this discussion. They want to hear the risks and the benefits and make their own decision. He said, that's not what we want here. If you think there's a single chance you can help them, then help them. They don't want to hear the nuance and the risk and the benefit. Here, the doctor says this is what you need to do, and the patient says, okay, go ahead. And so it was interesting trying to be sensitive, trying to, be nuanced. Actually, my colleague there taught me that's actually not culturally sensitive to be that sensitive. Patient wants a paternalistic or maternalistic doctor to say, this is your disease, this is the treatment, and this is what we're going to do. Sound good? And so that was sort of another interesting piece of our attempt to be sensitive and self-conscious actually not being what somebody wants and having to be conscious of that. Double negative of self-conscious, self-conscious.
It's funny, there was a phrase that was repeated throughout the book, a Haitian phrase, which I'm guessing was more common, not just used on you, but that after God is the doctor, which I imagine was really great for your ego. Or a lot of pressure, depending on what kind of mood you were in. But it raises, and especially as this is sponsored by a faith community, one of the cases that I thought was the most interesting was Pasteur, because it involved you engaging with a Haitian church and being with this person of faith, and religion was also another sort of cultural difference between you and these people. And I was curious how that affected your work with them, or your perspective to have people who were saying things like, because I know that this is not your belief system, it's all in God's hands, after God is the doctor. There was a lot, Pasteur's stuff was very much like, with the help of Jesus, I will be saved. Yeah.
No, I think you described it well. And as you said, as a not particularly religious and also practical, doctor, we're pretty practical, that I respect the patient's belief system, but whatever is happening in the belief system or in the world beyond that, which we can see and understand, in our world here, if the surgeon is having their hands guided by God, that's great, but they still sometimes make a mistake, or it doesn't come out quite how we hoped it would. So it was interesting to navigate that faith. On that one hand, it was inspiring when I would explain to a patient, this is going to be a big surgery. They're going to be cutting into your head, taking out part of your brain. Okay. And I thought, did I not explain it well? Is this a language barrier? And, there's a scene where I'm asking Pasteur, one of the people he stays with in Boston, does he really understand what's happening on Monday? And he said, yeah. I said, a big surgery, they're going to cut into his head. He said, yeah, he understands. I said, are you sure? I mean, just, you think of us, we've heard about brain surgery on ER, and we've seen someone in a coma on TV, or in our own families, right? And they haven't seen this, right? There's not a TV there. They're not watching ER. It's hard to even have a radio, in most households in Haiti. And so there's no shared frame here. And so this friend of ours just said, yeah, it's his faith. He has full faith that whatever happens is God's will and it's in God's hands. And it was amazing to see someone so relaxed before such a major surgery, right? Whereas you could imagine, at least any of us, certainly myself, maybe the more I know about medicine, the less relaxed I would be to think of going for brain surgery, right? And person just saying, you know, this, you know, what's God's will happen. So it was an interesting challenge to negotiate, to make sure, okay, I understand your belief system, I appreciate it, but I need you to still understand you could die in this surgery. And the surgeon is going to make you sign a paper that you understand that. So do you understand that? Do you have any questions? No, because it's in God's hands. Okay, but also, do you understand what I'm saying? So again, one of the interesting themes of the book really is walking back and forth between these worlds of science and faith, and seeing how they, you know, again, how the patient can have a very different view of these issues than we might expect.
Yeah, it also seemed to cause some challenges with getting informed consent about something. If there was a language barrier, if there was a cultural difference, and if there was, if you know, you had patients who were nonverbal or who were children, or who were not able to say that, to say exactly what it was that they thought or felt. So Joel actually asked a really interesting question, going back to our being mortal question. So because Janelle was not always verbal, it might not have been easy to answer this question, but he wanted to know what would be Janelle's answer to the question of what a good outcome is.
I would say I've thought a lot about this and written a lot about this, and I still don't know the answer to that. And we had to rely on his mother and his church community of what they believed when they knew him when he was well, he would want and would have wanted. So without giving too much of the plot of the book away, the book is posing that question maybe, and not answering it so much.
And not to spoil it, but I think that in the it's either the epilogue or the final chapter, there is really a nice image of at least what a good day looks like, if not a good permanent outcome looks like. So we've talked about this before because this is my business, how you're not a practicing Jew. You actually get mistaken for a rabbi about twice as often as I do because of the beard. And in fact, the title of my blog, This Is What a Rabbi Looks Like, came from one of the times that you were mistaken for a rabbi, and that doesn't happen to me. So anyway, I was curious if there's anything about your Jewish upbringing or any Jewish teachings that influenced your work in any way.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we obviously grew up in the same house and going to synagogue, and I remember the rituals, and you remember hearing these things and saying these things, even if, as you know, I'm not going to synagogue at this time. And one thing I do remember, because it must have been said every time and it was in English so I could pick it up, was treat others as you would want to be treated. The rest is commentary, go and study it. Somehow, whenever I would hear one of my mentors, who was also sort of similar to me, raised Jewish but not practicing, whenever he would say some deep truth of neurology, whenever this happens, think this, I would always joke to him, the rest is commentary, go and read it, because he's written a 6,000-page textbook of neurology. So, this comes through as a, any religion hopefully has at its, base this idea that's reflected in this Haitian Creole proverb, which also comes up in the book tout, moun, which means every person is a person, or each person is a person. And, you've mentioned a few times the issues of the day. I've been reflecting on the fact that when people think about racism or sexism or injustice or inequity, they think of them conceptually, and then they say, I should read about it and educate myself if I'm of the privilege not to be affected by it. And they say, oh my goodness, 1,000 police killings a year. Oh my goodness, 700 million people in the world live on less than $2 a day. Oh my goodness, 4 billion people in the world live without basic access to healthcare. And suddenly we get lost in the numbers. Most of the time when our brains have to count something, we say it's 1, 2, 3, or a lot, right? We don't have to think in millions, billions, and thousands. And that shock, intended to shock people when we read about this and motivate them, can also paralyze us and make us inactive. And I think that teaching of, amidst these millions and billions of people that we call the poor or the unfortunate or those affected by racism or violence or what have you, these are individuals like you and me, tout, moun. Every person is a person. And when you see it that way, on the one hand, you're moved to act. I read somewhere recently that the brain doesn't respond to statistics, it responds to anecdotes. That can have pluses and minuses, but part of the reason I wanted to tell this story was because how many times have people heard how many people in the world are poor, how many people in the world don't have access to healthcare? In this moment, how many people in the world have been aware that racism is a problem but are articulating it for the first time? But when you think about the individual people just like us and what they've suffered, suddenly your compassion comes naturally. And on the other hand, you realize if I don't have to solve a problem on the scale of billions and I can try to solve one of those billions, then it's one less. And if you do that, and if someone else does that, maybe working together, and then that's where the title comes from, one by one by one, that we may be able to make a small difference. So that's one teaching, and I'm sure you could quote it, and I think you did mention it to me. I apologize, I don't know where it's from, if it's Talmudic or in the actual liturgy, this idea that every life has value, and making one life better is the same as, well, I don't know, you should say something.
I'm going to give everybody some footnotes on the Jewish teachings that you're espousing. So all the rest is commentary, the treat others as you want to be treated, which actually the original text is what is hateful to you, do not do to another person, but that doesn't flow well off the tongue. But all the rest is commentary that comes from Hillel, who's a first century rabbi. And the tout, moun reminds me of two different passages. So one is from Genesis, which is that we're all created b'tselem Elohim, we're all created in the image of God. So we're supposed to think of each person as having that divine spark in them, and that's supposed to give us some sense of equality, of being universally connected, of that. And then more specifically, and I think this actually originates in the Cain and Abel story, but you find it in the Talmud, that anyone who saves a life saves a whole world, and on the other side, anyone who destroys a life destroys an entire world. And that not just in an abstract way, but that when you save a life, you save all of that person's descendants, anyone who could come from them. And I would also argue, just to expand it to a modern context, any good they were going to do or any life they were going to touch, you've saved that or you've destroyed that. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of my Jewish text gloss on what you've said. I like how that all the rest is commentary stuck with you, because I can hear Rabbi Seligman, our childhood rabbi, reading that. I think it used to be in the prayer book. I don't think it is anymore in the new one. Okay, so before we're about to get to some questions from our crowd. Mom has a question too. All right, so you are now, one of the reasons we had to move this a little later is you are now on the faculty of a new medical school, and particularly in a position that is about global health. And what is one thing you want your students and all incoming medical students? I thought we might have some incoming medical students on the call, but I'm not sure that we do. What would you want them to know about global health, especially given you mentioned earlier you got like the egg salad on a cruise ship thing, which I want to hear that story some other time, but you didn't get a good education in that regard. What do you want your students to get?
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure if this is one thing or maybe it's one big thing that, I think our hope in this new medical school is to really integrate the social determinants of health and aspects of global health and how social context affects health into the whole fabric. When I was starting medical school before I went on leave, there was a course called Physician and Society, which was supposed to address these things, but was like the history of autopsy began with robbing graves and all kinds of stuff that didn't make any sense. And when I came back 6 years later, the new dean joked to me, while you were away, the course Physician and Society got a patient in it. It's called Physician, Patient, and Society. Can you believe the symbolism of that being missing that whole time? And so we've evolved a little, but not enough. And I think in moments like this, I have seen medical students on social media saying, are your faculty talking about this? Because ours aren't. and for the students to see that the classroom and the world are separate. We as faculty and what we're teaching, whether it's neuroscience or anatomy or whatever, loses credibility, right? So for me, it's not one course Friday afternoons for 30 minutes that says these issues have global implications. It's whether, somehow we can do a better job of tying this together. Rudolf Virchow, who was one of the main discoverers and proponents of the cell theory that sort of lays at the basis of how we understand life, was also a social scientist. And he wrote, medicine is a social science and politics is just medicine on a grand scale. So whenever people recently have been saying, well, we don't have time for that, we have to teach this part of biochemistry, or we don't have time for that, I try to, we shouldn't be talking about politics. I was, moderating a forum related to global health, and I said, let's return to our topic and not talk about politics. I always pull that quote out, not just because it's a beautiful quote, because I think this guy discovered the cell, and this was 200 years ago. I think he has some credibility in talking about the connections between biology and what's happening in the outside world, because we know from the science very much that people's background and people's neighborhood affects their health, and people's history and the politics around them affect their health. So for me, the one thing is to really integrate that into the fabric and not make it a separate course where you learn how everything else relates to the world. It's just not how it works. And it's jarring in the real world when you realize, this prescription pad is only going to get me so far to help this patient if I can't address their social circumstances.
Well, it sounds like we were both in graduate school while a graduate school was redoing its curriculum to try to make it more practical, and that can be very challenging, especially knowing we still have to do all of the very detail-oriented learning, but we also want to be able to have practical applications of this. And one thing that a lot of my colleagues and I are saying is that nothing prepared us for this, for what we're going through right now. And I imagine that physicians got maybe a little bit more preparation for dealing with something like this, but I'm curious what your 1 minute response would be to how the pandemic's been handled, and maybe what impact it's having in communities like ours versus poorer communities in the US versus Haiti. We don't actually hear much about how it's impacting people in Haiti.
Yeah. Good question. Well, as is obvious in the news, as we talked a little bit about earlier, coronavirus is affecting everyone who is exposed to it, and to different degrees. And some of that has to do with the amount of virus you end up inhaling, and some of it has to do with your health. But both of those things are dependent on where you live and who lives with you and how many people, and do you have to go to work, or do you have the privilege to stay home? And when you go to work, are you in a packed city bus or driving by yourself? So I think a lot of people, medical activists and many others have been saying for a long time, trying to, shout at the megaphone, the social determinants of health. It's the social determinants of health. All the rest is commentary, right? Social determinants of health. And this is not how we wanted people to learn, but the numbers are the numbers, right? And it's very clear what's happening. In Haiti, all of us who work there and my colleagues there are extremely frightened. We know that something that saves lives in coronavirus are ventilators. In Haiti, there are about 20 to 30 ventilators for a population of 11 million. So, and just because you have the machines doesn't mean they all work, doesn't mean there will be electricity continuously, doesn't mean you have a nurse expert to take care of a patient on a ventilator. And Haiti is one of many countries where that's the case. So Haiti and the Dominican Republic share the same island, but they've had very different histories. That would be a topic for another evening. But Dominican Republic, suffice to summarize simply, is a much wealthier country. You hear that people have gone on vacation in the DR. You haven't probably not heard of anyone going on vacation to Haiti. And so as far as we know, there are many cases in Dominican Republic and few in Haiti, but this is likely because the resources to test are not there, and many patients don't have access to physicians, to healthcare where they could be tested and treated. So many of us are frightened that if this is what it looks like in a very high-resourced country like the United States and high-resource countries in Europe, that countries like Haiti are going are at risk for being devastated by this, unfortunately. And Partners in Health, fortunately, is on the ground. They're working very hard to, at least in their dozen hospitals, scale up testing and work on contact tracing and isolation and all of these things that we hopefully learn from how things went in the US. But whether the cat's out of the bag there and we just haven't seen it in testing, we don't know. But many of us are deeply frightened, and our colleagues at Partners in Health can certainly use all the support they can get.
That was actually going to be my next question is, I think there are some medical people, people involved in medicine on this call, but a lot of us are lay people in that sense. And what can we do to help people, like patients like Janelle, help communities like that one in Haiti, help, and also to help for medical equity here?
Yeah, great question, and I'm glad that you asked. My answer is always, research the organizations. I'm not trying to promote Partners. Well, I am trying to promote Partners in Health.
I'm going to put it in the chat box.
I'm not on their payroll, right? And they have, very little overhead. It's an organization I trust and know about, have worked with for a long time. But find your organizations and research them. I talk a little bit about this in the book, this culture of voluntourism. Haiti is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, and it's very easy to get to from the United States, an hour flight from Miami. And as a result, there are 10,000 NGO, non-governmental organizations there. And so why is it the poorest country in the world if all this money is flowing into these organizations? And every plane down there is filled with do-gooders. And I always wonder, if you added up all their plane fares and helping Haiti t-shirts and all that, what could we actually do for Haiti? So the intention I honor and value in volunteers, and I think there's always value in showing solidarity and showing up and saying, I stand with you, I want to help you. And yet, if you have the means to do it and you find the organizations that are doing the work, they always need more resources than they have. And so I always advise, whether it's Partners in Health or Doctors Without Borders or, talking about social justice, the Equal Justice Initiative. I'm sure many on this call could continue to list organizations that do good work. I often advocate, if you have the expertise to advise, wonderful. If you don't, but your heart is moved, reach for your wallet, not your plane ticket. But there's certainly benefits to all aspects.
Yes, and now with all of the wonderful ways we have of communicating with each other, even if your wallet is not huge, you can tell other people, you can raise awareness about organizations like PIH and Partners in Health is really easy because its website is 3 letters, so PIH.org. So I want to open it up for questions. If you want to type them in the chat box. Mom has a question about how you juggled Janelle and your work once you were back in Boston, which, Mom, you should know this. You read the book.
So that is discussed in the book, and that's a good question. There are moments where I thought I wanted to be doing this work, and in Haiti, I'm fully in Haiti, and in Boston, I'm back in Boston, and yet, as becomes clear in this book, I'm trying to take care of a patient who's alone, far from their country, severely disabled, doesn't speak English, and needs a lot of care that the hospital who has accepted him maybe didn't quite realize, or I didn't quite understand or communicate clearly, becomes almost a second full-time job. So that's sort of an element of this book of, what does it mean to step forward in solidarity with someone and take on that role, and what does it mean to do the right thing if you don't really know the right way to do it?
All right, do we have other questions? I'm going to actually allow you, oh, Mom got kicked out, she didn't hear the answer. I'm gonna now make it possible for you to unmute yourselves. I will revoke this privilege if people start all talking at once, but if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask a question, you should be able to do that in about 30 seconds. Okay, does anybody have a question that they want to ask either through the chat or verbally?
Hello.
Hi, Joan.
All right. Verbally, I am doing it. I can't figure out how to do the chat. Going back to I guess the whole thing in the book, that I'm getting from with or at least that one debate. Bring the medicine to the United States. Like, take the person out of Haiti and take care of them here, then bring them back. Or how did you rectify that with working only in Haiti? For that question.
Yeah, good question. And this is something I debate with Paul Farmer, this sort of leader and luminary. And as you'll see, the answer I thought I would get from him, I don't. You know, when I first proposed that I thought this patient should be taken care of in Boston, people said that's so expensive, and you know, all the money that it'll take for the care. You know, we're not sure we can do it. And why don't you just be cheaper and easier fly a neurosurgeon to Haiti? And the neurosurgeons I talked to said we could do the surgery in Haiti. We could bring the tools there on a plane. The question for us is always what happens after. So again, the resources for intensive care, for the type of support a patient needs after a surgery like this. We didn't have an MRI scanner. The CAT scanner didn't always work. And a lot of folks who said, just do it. This will cost a few $100 of a plane ticket instead of hundreds of thousands of dollars for care in the US. And I always said, I think if we do this surgery in Haiti, the patient will die. Not during the surgery, but the post-operative resources wouldn't be there. So there are some surgeries, I mentioned cataract surgery, where big teams go to very poor areas of ophthalmologists and they can remove hundreds of cataracts in a short period, and patients go from blind to seeing. There's very little post-operative care. Nurses there can take care of it. But in Haiti, we thought brain surgery was asking a lot. There are neurosurgeons in Haiti that do certain procedures, but this tumor was at the very center of the brain. The initial surgery, I think, was 12 or 13 hours, required a lot of very specialized nurses, neurologic intensive care nurses. So for these particular patients, we thought it was too dangerous to do in Haiti and required you know, some real generosity from our colleagues in our Boston hospitals. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, and I think you had talked about a lot in the book about, we often address these questions by saying we can't do this because it's not sustainable. How do you answer that question?
Yeah, so
statement, I guess.
Yeah, I was gonna read from that part of the book. I think you know, that's one of the key sort of things we talk about here is it's not sustainable, right? And people said, don't do this because the next brain tumor patient you see in Haiti, we might not have a donor willing to spend a few $100,000 to get them their care. It's not sustainable. Instead, you could use that money to build a school, to vaccinate a whole village, to build a new hospital. And what I thought was, try explaining that to these patients, right? What's the point of building a new hospital for that patient if they won't live to be treated in it? So again, a lot of what we do is not sustainable. And Paul Farmer likes to say, you know, people say it's not cost effective and we don't have enough resources. And he always says, we have more resources now than we ever had in the entire history of the human race. We just only think that they're valuable for the people who have them. And for people who don't have them, then they're too valuable. We can't share them. So the resources are there, they're just inequitably distributed. So that's sort of our counter argument. What would you want if someone said, you know, there's only one of these for the next 10 years and we don't think you should get it. It's not sustainable. Unless people say, well, I want it, right? And so we try to live up to that as well. The money is there. You just have to find someone to cough it up. That's one of the lessons here.
Yeah, yeah. I almost forgot about that passage. We did want you to read something.
Okay.
I just wanted to see if other people have, it might be a good way to close. I want to see if other people have questions.
Me.
Oh, yes. Hi, Myra.
How are you, Leah?
Good, how are you?
Aaron, I don't know if you remember me. I'm Temple Shalom.
Yes.
I looked a little different back in the day. This is not a medical question. This is more, what's your take on why Haiti still is considered one of the poorest countries? What is it that's causing such an equity with that? And I don't, you know, based on your living experience and speaking with the people there.
Yeah, so I know I'm quoting Paul Farmer a lot, but he's a very quotable person. One thing he likes to say to us when we bring things up is history didn't start when you got here, which I always think is a, you know, provocative thing to say. And
True.
You know, Haiti's history, which is not that well known to many, Haiti was a French colony, and it was the richest of the French colonies. And at its peak, on the backs of the African slaves who the French imported, it was generating more revenue than the 13 colonies of America put together.
Wow.
So it was a crown jewel of France, and yet the conditions for slaves were horrendous, and the slaves ultimately revolted.
Right.
And the slaves defeated Napoleon's army. So Napoleon sent his army to try to defend Haiti. It was that valuable. And when Haiti declared its independence, it was the first and last and only successful slave revolt, and Haiti became the first freed Black nation. This was 1804, 60 years before the US would abolish slavery. So the US said, don't pay attention to Haiti because we don't want that happening here. France said, we're not going to trade with you. So I know I'm telling you 200-year-old history, but Haiti was born into a hostile and racist environment, and that has been perpetuated. The 1990s, you may remember this, the 4 H's of HIV were homosexuality, homophilia, heroin, and Haitians. And this was propagated in the medical community that Haitians had brought AIDS to the United States. Turns out the United States had brought AIDS to Haiti through the sex trade. So that's 200 years later almost, this very racist history. We know even recently our own president calling Haiti one of the, quote, shithole countries to which we should be sending people back to. And we recently learned that symptomatic COVID patients were deported to Haiti, in a country that has no resources to support it. So these are, again, why, people always say, why are they so poor? Is it bad luck? And Paul Farmer always says, it's not bad luck, it's history, it's politics, it's economics, and it's race.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that short answer to a very complex. And I just want to, say how impressed I am by all of your accomplishments. I knew you when you were a little kid, and to see you now. And Leah, you also. I mean, it's just, for me, it's just wonderful to see all the accomplishments that you both have made to this world. So thank you.
Nice of you. Thank you.
Well, we want to acknowledge our mom since she's here. It looks like you've had a lot of trouble getting on and off the call, but we do want to acknowledge our mom. A lot of people have asked her what she did and to raise someone like Aaron and sometimes someone like me. And Danny, of course, who's also on the call, and also doing very important work. And our parents were very loving and attentive to us, raised us with good values, and particularly for Aaron. And I was thinking about this because I just gave this book to a friend of mine's kids, read to him about Louis Pasteur and how Louis Pasteur invented the rabies vaccine, and with the little soldiers going through the needle. So it wasn't anything in the water. It was us being supported, and we want to thank our mom and our dad for that. And I just want to see if we have time for one more question, and then I'm going to ask Aaron to close with reading from his book. All right. So why don't we hear a little bit from the book?
This is from the first chapter. I've heard about Janelle by email and trying to live up to Partners in Health's mission statement and try to grow up and be Paul Farmer. I write to some neurosurgeons and ask them, could we send Janelle to their hospital in the United States? So I'm going to read you their response, and then my response was sort of the end of the first chapter of the book. So the neurosurgeons wrote back that they disagreed with trying to help Janelle for several reasons. First, they felt that bringing this patient abroad for care would be unsustainable, since there was no guarantee that this could be offered to the next brain tumor patient we might meet in Haiti. Second, they thought that treating the patient wouldn't be cost effective. How could we justify hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of care for one patient when that money could be used to help so many other patients with lower cost illnesses? Finally, they were concerned the surgery would be too high risk with the potential for the patient to worsen afterwards, even if performed in the United States. They suggested a palliative approach, not touching the tumor. Sustainability, cost effectiveness. These considerations may be well-intentioned on a policy level, but they break down when faced with a patient in front of you. True, we likely wouldn't be able to help every patient who needed brain surgery in Haiti, but why should that prevent us from trying to help Janelle? True, for the potential hundreds of thousands of dollars that would go into this one patient's treatment, surgery, intensive care, radiation, chemotherapy, we could vaccinate an entire region of Haiti against deadly childhood infections. We could probably even build a whole new hospital in Haiti. But try explaining that trade-off to Janelle. What would be the point of building more hospitals if they would never be able to help him? When we extend life for the world's poorest by providing vaccines and primary health care, what do we tell our patients when they develop more complex conditions like brain tumors? Paul Farmer, one of PIH's founders and current leaders, has described the struggle to serve those right in front of you while simultaneously working to reduce the longer-term risk of others ending up right in front of you as the chief tension of PIH's work. With Janelle right in front of us, it didn't actually seem like that much of a tension to me. I knew I couldn't come up with a sustainable, cost-effective solution that would solve enormous problems like global poverty and inequitable access to modern healthcare. I'd have to leave that to the Paul Farmers of the world. But as a doctor, couldn't I try to help this one patient? About 4 billion people lack access to basic healthcare, let alone the type of advanced healthcare that patients like Janelle require. That's more than half the world's population, an astronomical number. 4 billion. We count stars in billions. The Earth is 4.5 billion years old. It's an overwhelming number. It would take more than 120 years to count to 4 billion at a rate of 1 number per second. But it's a real number of real people. Patients like Janelle remind us that overwhelming global statistics are composed of individuals, each with hopes and dreams, family and friends, and a right to live a healthy life free of disease. Every billion is made up of a billion ones.
Well, thank you so much. Mom's applauding. We're quelling. We're so proud of you and all the work that you do and the way that you represent our family and our people in the world is really wonderful. I want to do the shameless plug for the book, One by One by One. Please purchase it if you can, from your local independent bookstore to keep them open during the pandemic. Open Book delivers hand delivers to your house. And please support Partners in Health or any other global health organization that you've done the research on. And actually, one way we were talking about this, one way you can support Partners in Health. So one of the really strange connections in Partners in Health is that Roald Dahl's daughter, Ophelia, was one of the founders or one of the supporters, or
is one of the founders and is the executive director.
And is the executive director of Partners in Health. And so one of the ways that they are raising money is that they got a celebrity cast to read on YouTube from James and the Giant Peach. So I believe if you go to Roald Dahl HQ on YouTube, that channel, I think the goal is just to watch that, and then that makes you donate to Partners in Health, so you can just skip that step. But if you know young children, this is a way to get them inspired and both by reading and to help people around the world. And I just want to say thank you, everybody, for joining us on this rainy evening. I'm going to stop the recording because I think some people from the family want to say hi. You're welcome to stay on and schmooze for a little bit, even if you're not in my family. Thank you, everybody, for coming. There's a tea with Rabbi B tomorrow at 3, services Friday at 6:30. All on Zoom. All that was sent to your email. It's no longer being posted on Facebook because we're trying to keep the uninvited guests out, and we did this evening, so yay. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Aaron, for taking the time with us. And when we stop the recording, we'll see, is Nina home?